Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest narration in the web series Forgotten Dungeon. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy Chapter 83, Uno Point of View. The newly made weapons were given to their intended owner, and, for the first time in forever, I observed the corners of Non's mouth going up in slightly. It might not seem like much, but when it came to a demure revenant, it was the equivalent of a normal person laughing and hollering. I felt a surge of warmth. Giving presents always made me happy, even if the items in question were tools of destruction and murder. It was the thought that counted, right? Anyway, the undead girl was getting used to her new weapons, twirling them on the palms of her hands like they were toys, not implements of death. After a moment, she grasped them and firmly in her hands, performing something I could only describe as shadowboxing, or more like shadow stabbing. Was that even a thing? She danced around the room, stabbing and piercing through invisible opponents. Her eyes and hands never rested. She dodged foes born out of her mind without a change in expression. The little kobold followed her lead, slipping under her arms and appearing in the wildest places, his daggers searing through the air in perfect complementation to Non's attacks. The show lasted minutes, and in the end, I wanted to clap, but a feeling of incongruity stopped me. Something was missing, something important. Then it clicked. In hindsight, it was so obvious. Non's new weapons lacked a sheath. The old ones were filled with the normal daggers, not to mention that its shape was all wrong. It took me only a second to create a pair of leather, tube-like containers made to easily fit the piercing, soul-sucking silhouettes. Then, with a thought, I added a lithe but sturdy belt that connected them, finishing the tool with some studded metal here and there. The upper part of the sheath was covered in button clasps for securing the weapon. Perfect. As soon as I spawned it, I checked if the system meddled in its creation. Alas, this time there was no reaction. It was understandable, as there was no magic in the leather, but it was still a shame. Was I growing spoiled, like a gacha gamer after a single 5-star pull? Non had noticed the sheath appearing and shifted her form into a less battle-ready stance. She walked with the grace of a predator, picking up my present without any hesitation. The revenant nodded to herself before detaching one of her other containers and waving it into the air. "More," she rasped, pointing to the belt. Curious, I made another one and observed as she proceeded to swing the belts over her arms and neck, making sure that the new daggers were securely located behind her back. The older weapons that I thought she would discard were left as they were, hanging from her waist. "Why go through all the trouble of having 4 weapons?" I asked. The second pair was clearly superior. I couldn't understand why she wanted to carry less potent daggers too. It was not like they were heavy, but it made me curious. After all, in RPGs, all the weapons were either discarded, sold, or salvaged. The girl grunted, her black hair swaying as she shook her head in exasperation. Was this something obvious? She unsheathed a stiletto and a dagger, lifting them for me to see. An unneeded consideration, as in the dungeon I was privy to observing everything I wanted. "Cut!" she spoke, exaggeratingly swinging the dagger before storing it away. "And," she continued, even as she took a crouched position before shouting out like the world's deadliest sting, "Pierce!" I could hear the air howl as the soul-drinker dagger moved, before perforating a nearby wall. As the revenant nonchalantly moved it from the stone, there wasn't even a scratch on the enchanted metal it was made from. Non inspected her tools before nodding sharply and sheathing them. Then she raised her head, not a drop of sweat visible on her pale skin. "Different." I inwardly nodded. "I understand. Specialized tools are needed for different situations." "Wait, what about blunt damage? I suppose it's rather effective against some of the undead, not to mention the other foes, right?" Instead of answering, the revenant pointed to her companion. The small kobold was startled, not understanding what was happening. It was my fault, really. Half of the conversation had been silent after all. Before I moved to correct my mistake, Non made a hand sign and her ninja follower's eyes brightened. The kobold produced a compact mace, suspiciously similar to those carried by some of the Liebers. That suspicion became a surety as the kobold pressed a hidden switch and the weapon hummed with electricity. "It had been some time since I made those," I grumbled. "At least somebody's finding them useful. The surfaces certainly aren't." "Useful," None agreed. "More. You need more. I guess fire and ice weapons should be nice to fill all the niches, right?" She nodded. My thoughts wandered for a moment before focusing on the present once again. "Sadly, that's not easy to do. These things are essentially a battery and a bit of wire to make sure the electricity will flow without obstructions. Just an overgrown taser," I mused, once again angry at not remembering how exactly the electricity worked. Angry about not knowing how anything worked, now that I thought about it. I came from a high-tech world, a proud member of our civilization. I was sure of the technology of Earth, of guns and engines, of nuclear weapons. But despite my pride, in the end, I was just a consumer, a cog in a machine. An ignoramus, if you will. My aspiring thoughts were cut short by the revenant girl's actions. She straightened up, signaling to a kobold attendant, who whirled into activity. It took me a few seconds to recognize what he was doing. Preparations for a long journey were the same no matter the world. Food, shelter, tools. "Leave," Lon spoke, her black eyes drilling holes in my soul. "I see." It wasn't the first time she left the shelter of my dungeon, and yet the feelings that her decision evoked were different than before. We got to know each other more, even though I intended to separate work from feelings. If the circumstances were different, I'd prefer to ask her to stay, at least until the danger from the Gaynard kingdom had passed. But none was on a timer. With each passing day, her humanity dwindled as it was replaced with a blind hate common in the undead. Still, there were words I needed to say. This time, I broadcasted them to both Non and a servant. "Stay safe. I assume you'll go straight to the Shield Star. The capital streets should be easy to navigate since you've grown up there, especially since they're under the siege and lack of manpower. Despite that, I ask you to not get complacent. It is possible that during your journey, you'll encounter the kingdom's forces on their way here. Leave them be. It is not worth risking your life when we'll be surely able to counter them," I grinned. "And no searching for Lord Hawk. You're stronger, but not that strong yet. I do not want to be forced into replacing your other limbs with metal." She waved her hands dismissively before quickly moving through my tunnels. Her attendant followed. And just before leaving for good, she turned back, whispering a few words. "Survive." Her silhouette, slowly melting into the darkness, looked lonely but determined. None. The night was cold and the darkness suffocating. Not that she could feel or care about that anymore. She got through it like a blade, unfeeling, efficient. Alone. "Q," her kobold running nearby protested, making her lips twitch again. It was the second time today. Usually she was more in control of her body. Of course, this was not a normal day. The ninja monster that accompanied her had a nearly supernatural ability to read her thoughts, especially when they concerned himself. "No," she responded, waving him off. His scrunched face forced her to continue. "Thoughts hard." "You're not alone, mistress," he spoke back, and she couldn't stop marveling at how quickly the little thing learned to talk. The kobold still preferred silence, just like her, but sometimes words were necessary. "What are our plans?" "Soldiers. Kill." "Master Uno asked you not to bother, though." The lizard monster tilted his head in confusion. She shook her head. "Confident. Too much." "But you can't be free from this curse if you're completely dead, mistress." That response nearly made her smile again. Third time. It would be the third time in one day. "Free, not when alone," she growled, cursing once again the power that was crippling her. "Then we run, mistress. I think I can smell death ahead. Undead, I mean." There was a vicious glint in the kobold's eyes. "It would be a perfect place to test my training." We changed our posture. The earlier speed exchanged for stealth, and soon the column of zombie-like soldiers emerged from a nearby forest. Correction. These were zombies, carrying the Gaynard Kingdom's emblems on their chest. There were also a flame carved in their armor, representing a noble house. "Kill," I ordered, bloodlust and anticipation swelling inside my mind. the only emotions the dead were permitted to have.
Kill, mistress!
My companion howled, malice streaming from its heavy-set eyes. During the slaughter, I nearly felt alive. Joel's point of view. I was lying in bed with Agnes, our sweaty bodies clinging to each other. After the change, her appetite for nightly activities had increased, but I didn't mind that in the slightest. The few scales she sported were unexpectedly cool to the touch, and the desire she radiated allowed me to easily respond in kind. Right now, she rested on my chest, exhausted and breathing evenly, drifting in and out of dreamland. I, on the other hand, was brooding. The silver oasis was full of nervous energy, and I knew that soon our preparations would be tested. We were as ready as we could be, but, as always, I hoped for a bit more time, a bit more strength to be gathered. It could mean the difference between the life and death of the men under my command, and because of that, resting seemed to be more and more foolish. I started standing up, sighing about another sleepless night, only to get pinned to the bed. A pair of inhuman eyes looked down, their owner half-naked and straddling me with the force of a hurricane. Her shapely body was completely uncovered, but the princess skillfully ignored her shameful nakedness. "Why the rush?" Agnes purred, and despite her tone, I knew a serious mood when I saw it. Still, I tried to deflect. "It's nothing important, my love. I just have to check the soldiers." Her lips twisted. She wasn't buying that excuse. "They're doing fine, not to mention you needed to check them on them every night. You're not cheating on me, I wouldn't dare." I let my real emotions slip for a moment. Having a warrior princess turned girlfriend was sometimes a scary thing. Besides, who would I even cheat on you with? "You better." Her grin was a little too predatory. "So, what are you nervous about? Spill it out." I struggled a bit, but she kept her position. "Or I'm not letting you go anyway." "Fine," I spat. "It's not like there's some big secret or anything. So, I'm worried that I underestimated those arrayed against me. With each passing day, we're closer to a retaliatory strike from the Gaynard Kingdom, not to mention other, more secretive parties might try their luck during the chaos. I fear the future, my love. I fear all we have built and created will crumble like a castle made of sand." Words spilled out of my mouth, and I saw Agnes's expression turning more somber. She was a royal through and through, learned in both politics and warfare. "I count and plan, trying to work with what we have, but each second wasted could turn into a life lost, into a grain of sand that'll break our forces." "Stupid," she kissed me deeply, before curling up my chest. I was still pinned, but the earlier threat was gone. "Tell me about your plans, about the enemies arrayed against us. Sometimes it's better to bounce ideas off each other, rather than to stew in uncertainty." I lifted my brow. "You always get your way, isn't it?" "Because I'm a princess," she answered cheerily. "So be it." I breathed deeply, focusing on the numbers. "The easiest to predict are Gaynard Kingdom royals. Despite the damage we have done against them, I am pretty certain that we may face 300 up to 1,000 low-ranked undead as a retaliatory force." Agnes gasped, and I hurried to assuage her worries. "Yes, I know we have like 200, maybe 250 trained soldiers, and that the Silver Oasis doesn't even have 2,000 citizens. It doesn't matter. Our warriors are well armed and competent. The dungeon keeps us sharp and high-leveled. Not to mention some of the surprises that Uno has stored underground." I trembled. "That's one of my worries. We have a murderous dungeon core as an ally. I can't tell when it will help us, and when it will stab us in the back." "As a person saved by the murderous dungeon core, I disagree a bit with your logic," Agnes responded frostily. "Did you already forget Boulder's death in its halls, or how its guardian came to be?" I angrily snapped, but seeing Agnes reel back brought me to my senses. I'm sorry. I know it's a sensitive topic." "No, you're right. The dungeon... Uno isn't a good spirit straight out of a fairy tale. If anything, he's a being that feeds on conflict and death. It was just our luck that his survival is tied to ours." "Back to the topic." I forcefully changed the flow of the conversation. "The undead are fodder, meant to occupy our forces. We might lose some soldiers, but the real danger should come from the elites accompanying them. These will either be a band of mages with a straightforward approach to smother us under their might, or a team of assassins working under the cover of night to eliminate our leadership." "Or both," Agnes grumbled. "Or both," I agreed. that is the worst-case scenario. I stopped, taking a breather before continuing. We should also anticipate an appearance of some forces from the Lunar Kingdom, but these are probably going to be scout teams, more in tune with dungeon assaults than regular warfare. Which doesn't mean they're weak, sure, but they're also not going to be immediately hostile. Not to mention necromancy is a forbidden art in Lunar Kingdom. If they meet Gaynard's forces, they're going to attack, yes. And even if they're unsuccessful, as soon as information about undead working for a human kingdom returns to the half-elven leadership, it's going to be war. Yes, a war of extermination, like nobody has seen since forever. I laughed grimly. Then there are the undead from the wastes. These guys are an enigma. I don't know how many or what forces they could bring to bear. From what I've heard, it seemed like the old Lish leading them seemed to know you, more like one of my ancestors. The language it spoke was completely foreign. Curiously, they seem to have some honor, so a duel or something of that nature seems possible. What? And since one of them is a warrior and the other a mage, you want me to participate? Not counting Master Vincent, I'm the most powerful caster. And when it comes to warriors, there are none as experienced as you. Some experienced warrior I am, getting overwhelmed by a succubi bitch, Agnes growled, her face turning feral as she remembered the defeat that nearly led to her death. Being taken by surprise, especially when one's attacking your allies, is no shame, I muttered. A real warrior can't be taken by surprise. These words seem familiar. That's part of Lord Hawk's teachings. Yes, I pray we won't have to face him in battle. You and me both. Anyway, this is all when it comes to enemies. The elven theocracy shouldn't move unless your friend stirs up some trouble. But even if she does, I would say that they must send a platoon. Their battle lines are already stretched thin, and those elves would pose more of a diplomatic mission than anything else, especially with the dungeon officially dead. And since they hate the undead, we could show them the Gaynard Kingdom's assault. Then it would be 2 countries against 1. Yes, that's the plan. Unless some of Uno's undead inexplicably appear in their vision, I grumbled bitterly. The creatures of the local dungeon core sometimes seemed more troublesome than their master. The Dross Republic is done. Their territory will probably spawn some monstrosities down the line. But right now, the only things that remains is salted earth and burned stone. Dwarven holds are a neutral, too, but I have a sinking feeling that Uno's small, stout soldiers bumbling about the surface weren't created from nothing. Our troops think them as part of the outcast clan we employed, but you and I know better. Yes, they carry the stench of decay, not of the body, but rather a soul. Still, a person without a beastman heritage would be hard-pressed to tell the difference. They don't drink ale. That's enough to know that these are no dwarves. I massaged my forehead. And you do remember that soon we'll have a few frozen returning veterans, so-called beastmen heritage, joining our ranks. What happens, happens, love. Besides, I don't think those who owe their lives to the dungeon will betray us, Agnes smiled. If only I could share your optimism, I murmured. Alas, it's the leader's role to be distrustful and plan for every occasion. Yet, like I said in the beginning, the biggest unknown is the ability and amount of Uno's forces. We know he has dozens of armored undead in his ranks, with the new arachnid creatures appearing in the lowest levels. Then there are the kobolds and rats. You can't forget about the rats. Agnes looked torn between disgust and grumbling respect. I swallowed. They have an entire civilization down there, mages, crafters, soldiers, leaders, and farmers. We don't know where their tunnels end, and where their forces had already appeared. If not for their blind loyalty to their master, I would be terrified. I took a deep breath, and because of their blind loyalty, I am terrified. Then there's the exploding undead produced in massive amounts by the dungeon core. We don't know how many of them there are and where they are stored. And besides, Agnes, this girl. I kissed her on the cheek and went to sleep. Even deep into the dreamland, Agnes clung to me tightly. It was fine. Everything was going to be fine. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Bushmaster 177, HenryTheRed, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Sevaren Serberous. Thank you very much.